Hi, I'm Andrea and welcome to Productive C#. In this video, I want to talk about how you can iterate across collections and arrays using C#. There are 4 different ways using the while loop, do-while loop, for loop, or the for each loop. Let's start. We have a letters, that is an array that contains 5 letters, A, B, C, D, and E. Let's start from the while loop. The while loop consists of the while keyword and then a statement that returns a boolean. Let's say, for example, if I do while true and then I print right line hello. So this statement means that until the condition in this between brackets is true, in this case is always true, perform this block of code, in this case just printing hello. So if I run this code, you will basically see that I'm printing hello infinitely. It's never stopping. This program never stops. Let's say I'm gonna use a different condition. Let's say I create a variable called I that starts from 0, and I want to carry on doing this body as until I is lower than length. Okay, and then I'm going to increment I every time. So what I'm doing here, I'm starting to set I with 0, and then I check if I is lower than the length of the collection, so in this case 5, and if it is, just run this code and then increase I. Of course, at some point I will be the same as the length of the collection, and then the condition will be false and the loop will end. If I run this code, you can see that it's printing hello 5 times. Instead of printing hello, let's print actually the value of the element of the collection in position I. If I run it, it's just printing A, B, C, D, and E. Okay, so this is how you can iterate through a collection using the while loop. Another way of doing that is using the do while. So the while could be copied and moved at the bottom, and you could do a do while loop instead. What's the difference between the two is that when you do a do while loop, you always run the body of the loop at least once. So in this case, if I run it, it's still gonna work, printing A, B, C, D, and E, but keep in mind that this loop will fail if, for example, the collection is empty, because if I do that, I'm gonna always run the first body and it's gonna fail because I'm trying to access the first element of an empty collection. So you should use do while and only if you know that you always want to run the body at least once. Okay, now let's talk about the for loop. How can I do the same loop using the for? For allows me to add 3 sections. First is the initialization section. All the code I was doing here outside the while, I can do it now inside the for loop. Then I use the semicolon. After that, I put the condition I want. In this case, I can just copy the condition I was doing the while loop inside here. And then I put the logic that incremented the variable in here. So I can remove it from the body, and I can remove the while at the end. As you can see, all the statements that I was using when I was doing the while loop now are all in a single line inside the for loop. Let's see if I run it, if this still works. Yep. Okay, so it's very important to understand how the for loop works. The first statement is the initialization statement. This is only done once when you start the loop. Then the body is executed. After that, the third part of the for loop is executed. They usually increment a variable, and then a condition is checked. If this condition is true, again it's going to run the loop, the body, then increment the variable and check again until this condition becomes false, and then the execution flow will carry on after the for loop. It's a very compact way of doing things. It's very the for loop is very flexible because it allows you to access, of course, the index of the elements, allow you to do multiple initialization. Like, for example, I could have here, like, let's say j to 5. I could just use a command here to do additional stuff, and you can actually do quite a lot of stuff in the for loop. You can nest for loop, stuff like that. And it's quite a powerful way of doing things, and all of the things are optional. So if you want with the for loop, you could actually do like semicolon semicolon, and it will just do an infinite loop. This is more like a classic C style of doing iterations. Okay, so if I now go back to how the for loop was initially here, when I actually iterate through all the letters, you can see the Visual Studio is telling me that the for loop can be converted into a for each loop. And if I use this refactoring, you can see that I'm converting the for loop into a for each, and I'm renaming the T variable to letter. And as you can see, I'm getting quite a nice syntax to do the exact same thing. That's iterate through each element of a collection, but that reads a lot more like English. So for each letter in letters, print the letter. And if I run it, as you can see, it's still working. I'm printing A, B, C, D, and E. The for each is the best and the most elegant way of looping through collection using C#, and it works across all the collections, not just arrays like in this case, but also lists and other collections in .NET. All the types that implement enumerables can be iterated through the for each. Of course, if you use for each, you lose the access to the index of a particular element. So if you need that, you probably want to use the for loop. But the for each is definitely the recommended way of iterating through a collection in C#. Okay, so there are 4 different ways of iterating through collections in C#, using the while loop, do while loop, the for loop, or the for each loop. Thank you very much for watching.